Killing demons does not make Doom a Christian game. I said it. They're going to use this article and my experience to talk about why. So we actually have a couple different articles. First point up is Heavenly Parasites. So we look at Eternal's story, continuing the 2016 but changing a few things. Hell is now an alternate dimension harvesting human souls for energy. When we look at 2016 and the origin energy, it all seemed like one of those Final Fantasy VII plot lines of the energy and saving the earth and not doing bad and unrecycling things. Anyway, we take a look at the heaven aspect and we wonder if there is a connection. Well, you see, Doom has actually taken from the Bible for years now. I mean, back since 1993. Look at Tower of Babel. Look at Necrovol Tower, which ascends to the heavens. Sounds familiar? What they do is they take their own direction with it. In the terms of Urdak here, we see the heavenly realm. However, the Bible verses are actually what the Urdak text is. I've seen it in an Acid Glow video. So they do take from it, but they use their own twist and spin. I actually interviewed Hugo about this stuff and got some interesting insight there if you want to check that out. So look at this here. In short, Christianity and all other religions are lies made up by these alien beings so they can parasitically survive, because that's what this article says. The makers rely on the hell energy for their immortality. They struck a deal with the demons. That's a little bit different than the biblical version. So Doom kind of took it and made it a fantasy spin, as you can see here. But they did give it the ethereal celestial vibe in Urdak and the Holt. Now, Eternal's not the first story to portray God as parasitic aliens. It is sci-fi, as the article says, and this actually relies, if you look at this bold line here, as far as lies and things like that, not so. What it is saying is what Hugo was mentioning about what if the other side was at the forefront. So this might all be seeming a little bit crazy, like, Allstin, what are you getting on about? Well, let's continue on here. We know that the parasitic aliens was one way, but let's take a step to the other article here. Now, Doom might be trivializing the occult, but it certainly does not encourage it. Doom would only be satanic if it promoted or encouraged occult practices or worship. The worldview presented is definitively humanist rather than Christian. So what humanist means is it places the person at the forefront, because what I find a lot of times, Doom says he is the Doomslayer is the savior, but he's more of a superhero, right? He's saving people's lives and things like that, but not in a savior-esque way or a figure in that regard, which is an interesting distinction to make. So we take a look here, and I like this little image right here. That's funny. So we take a look back, and here it says, Eternal leaves the door open for a different interpretation. This is absolutely what they're going at. The makers were created by an ancient being called the Father. Yes, so knowing what we know about Tag 1 and 2 and the old switcheroo at the end that a lot of people say is a retcon. Let me know in the comments if you think it is as you watch this video. And the Father disappeared, and then we find out he's not actually the bad guy Devoth, and woo, got me there. So if this is meant to be God, it would imply a form of deism, that God created everything but then left it to run, and that's where things went wrong. That's not the traditional Christian viewpoint. It is deism, humanism, and other things. It's taking Eternal and molding it into a fantasy world and creating its own with the same terminology but a different core meaning behind it. So we cannot draw major conclusions without more detail. There may be a statement here. We go on, we see a Gandhi quote, and looking as far as, let's keep reading here, not just a man. The last interesting development is that you, the hero, now have a story. When we refer back to this other article, we scroll up here, he says that John Carmack, back in the 90s, pretty much compared the story in FPS games to adult movies. Like, it's there, yeah, but nobody's really watching or playing for the story, if we're being honest here. It's since changed. Carmack, I believe, has withdrawn on that quote. But when we look back in the 90s and we see the story, they, even from then, 30 years ago, it's not messages about theology or spiritual warfare. They're not saying, like, God did this or Satan did that. It's all different terms. It's Dark Lord. It's still hell as a wide gap term there, but it's something different. It's a fantasy approach. So we continue to scroll down here, get the context. I have this poster actually right back there. There was no clear political or religious message intentionally baked in to make kids shoot up the schools or worship Satan. Interestingly enough, I did a video on a certain school incident. It's actually up here in the corner there. So if you notice, none of this, I'm pretty sure it's to make sure that everyone is at least somewhat content, because you don't want to go too far off in this end and then make everyone that is religious in your audience angry, but you don't want to also, you see what I mean? It's a fine line that id Software has to walk when they are creating these things. And this goes back to the 90s, despite the imagery and the hanging corpses, the Necrovol being what it is, we take a look. Ironically, the choice to fight demons was made partially to avoid controversy. Yeah, I mean, if you think about that, they're not going to go outright and say that you're fighting Satan himself. They're not actually going to call Slayer Jesus. What they've done is they've taken this and they've put the message in that everyone can agree with. If you look at Wolfenstein, Nazis were the bad guys. Nobody's going to object to that, and that's a whole other story. But demons, nobody's going to object to killing demons or evil things, right? They're the bad guys. We're supposed to get rid of them. Sandy Peterson was actually a Mormon, and he has no issue with it because he says they're the bad guys. That's kind of where I think some of this comes from. So it's see how they put that together? It's safe enough that everyone can be okay with it, but it's not too edgy enough to where it ticks off a portion of your fan base, but it's also their own terms on it. They've taken these common terms and they've made it their own. So we take a look. Yeah, well, actually, look, Sandy Peterson, just like I told you, I have no problem with the demons in the game. They're just cartoons, and anywhere they're the bad guys. Now, this is an interesting thing about Doom and kids. I actually want to make a video on kids playing Doom. It's a judgment call that parents have to make. Not every child will be affected in the same way. Some disturbed and some have a conversation. You can really take a look here, right? We can really begin to see how this comes apart. And to really take a look at this, at worst, we went over this here, humanist. It places the Slayer as, who are you, a human, to defy our traditions, the con maker says. So we have this human that got in the superpower divinity machine, look at the name right there, and becomes this ultimate power fantasy, which makes the player want to play it. That player feels powerful, look at all the demons he's destroying, look at all the good he's doing. But it's a superhero, not savior style. And you can kind of see the parallels that id Software draws there. The Tower of Necroval ascending to the sky, Tower of Babel in E2M8. There are so many references. In fact, Doom, classic Doom episode 4, Thy Flesh Consumed, that's a Bible phrase right there. All of the levels in that episode are as well. What is the intent behind taking this? Do they want to just make it their own? Do they want to... See, that's the thing. In the end, Doom being a Christian video game is little more than a joke. Though the game presents fundamental right and wrong, it makes no attempt to point to God and rely solely on human strength, which, as we say back and forth, it is a humanist game, not a Christian game, and it's not it uses satanic imagery in some regard, but it's their own definition of it, interestingly enough. And that, actually, depending on your viewpoint, may be controversial in itself, right? Because, well, they shouldn't be using that, or they should be. I find it very interesting here. These kinds of questions about context, story, and worldview can be applied to almost any media piece. So when we take a look all the way back here at the final picture of it, not just a man, because we've already gone over this. Eternal paints the world in entirely evil's mercy, only looking to a divine savior, and in this case, the Slayer, may be protected. He's given this messianic figure, but is that really what it comes down to? Did they pick that for a certain reason? Did they want to give the player as much power as they could without toeing that line very carefully? I find it interesting how it all comes apart, combined with the interview that Hugo and I had. So be sure to check that out right here, the Hugo interview where we talked about this very thing with the man himself. Subscribe if you like videos like this. I'm Allstin. Thanks for watching.